Dear God in heaven, we thank you
Mwari wedu
for this
kudenga,
opportunity to come together.
tinokutendai nemukana
We
wekuuya
thank you for the
pamwe chete.
messages that have brought us thus far. As we
Chikutendai
head into
nemamessages atiunza
unprecedented
izvezvi
times, we
apo
pray
takuenda
for
munguva
more
dzatisingazivi.
understanding of not what's going to
Tinonamata
happen to
kuti
tomorrow, but what
tigokwanisawo
has
kunzwisisa
happened, what has happened in the past,
kwete kune
what history we're
zvichaitika
living in at the
mangwana, asi
moment, so that we
zvakaitika
can understand the
zvakaitika
future.
kare nhoroondo
So guide and
yatikurarama
direct our
nhasi
thoughts
kuti
and our
tigonzwisisa
discussion.
zviri kumberi.
We ask in Jesus' name.
Tungamirirawo pfungwa dzedu
Amen.
nemadiscussion edu tokumbira muzita raJesu. Amen.
Okay, so I want to continue sharing thoughts on the Sunday law.
Ndoda kuramba
And I
ndichiendera
don't want
mberi
to take
tichishaya macho pfungwa
much time at
dzepaSunday
all in
law.
reviewing what I've done in the past,
Handisi
except
kuda
to
kutora nguva
say
yakarembesa
that
tichidzokorodza zvatakaita
one of the
kare.
symbols of Sunday law that we derive from
Kunze
Acts
kwekungoti
27
imwe symbol
is
yeSunday law
Fabius
yatinotora kuna
Maximus,
Acts 27
Quintus Fabius Maximus Gurgis, the
ndi Quintus
delegation that
Fabius
was
Maximum
led of
Gurgis,
Rome to Egypt in
delegation
272
yakatungamirira
BC.
kubva kuRome kuenda kuna
And
Egypt
the thoughts that I'm going to
272
share
BC.
today regarding that name
Pfungwa
are
dzandichataura
based on
nhasi
feedback that I've
maererano
received
nezita
on the
iri
previous studies. And
dziri
I'm
maererano
grateful for all
nefeedback
feedback,
yandakawana.
positive and negative.
Ndinotenda
It's all been
nefeedback
very
yese
helpful.
iri
So
positive
based on
neiri
that, I want
negative,
to
zvese zviri
continue the
kubatsira.
thoughts on
Maererano
Quintus
nezvozvo
Fabius
ndoda kuendera
Maximus
mberi
Gurgis.
nepfungwa pana
So
Quintus Fabius Maximus
we
Gurgis.
gained from 272 BC,
Saka
which we
takabva
dropped down
272 BC
into
iyo
the time period
yatakaendesa
of the Papyric
panguva
Wars
yehondo
because of
dzaPyrus nekuda
the number 273,
kwenhamba
and that brought us down into this
273.
history here.
Zvinobva zvatiunza
What we
kunhoroondo
did
iyi
was
iri
we
apa.
looked fully into his
Zvatakaita
name,
takatarisa
Quintus
zita rake
being his prenomen, fifth,
raQuintus iri prenomen
being the
yake,
fifth son or the fifth month. That's why you were named Quintus. You were either born in
mwana
the fifth
wechi5
month
kana kuti
or you were
akazvarwa
the fifth
mumwedzi
son.
wechi5.
Fabius comes from fava beans, which were used for
Fabius yaibva
elections and
kufava
voting.
beans
Maximus
dzaishandiswa
Gurgis,
kumaelections nekuvhota.
maximum flood,
Maximus
which
Gurgis
is the word that we
zvairevawo
connected
maximum
with
flood,
Sunday law for various
rinova
reasons that
vara
we've reviewed.
ratakakonekta kuSunday law
And just
nereasons
to
akawanda
clarify, when we're talking about Fabius,
kungojekesa
and
patinotaura
we're using
nezvekuti
symbols,
Fabius
the literal
tiri
here
kushandisa
is
masymbols.
not voting.
Literal
The
panapa
literal is
haisi
they were bean
kuvhota.
farmers. That's
Literal
where the
ndeyekuti
Fabius
vaiva
came
varimi.
from. They were
Ndo
literal
panobva
bean
varari
farmers.
kuti
The
Fabius.
spiritual
Literally
application
vaiva
is
varimi.
what is used for elections and
Application
voting.
ndespiritual
So that's not the literal.
tinozozvishandisa
They weren't called
kuspiritual
Fabius
kuvhota.
because of anything to do with
Saka
elections.
haisi
They were
literal.
called Fabius because they were bean farmers.
Fabius
So
vaisadaidza
literal
nokuti
and
kwaitwa
spiritual is a
maelections,
rule that we
vaiti
need to
Fabius
follow
nekuti vaiva
when
varimi.
using
Zvaiva
symbols.
literal. Then
So
tozofollowa hedu
Quintus,
takushandisa
fifth son
masymbols.
or the fifth
Quintus
month. So what we did
mwana
was we
wechi5
went to
kana kuti
the
mwedzi wechi5.
calendars
Saka
and we
takazoenda
went to
kumakalenda.
the Roman calendar in the
Takaenda
time
kukalenda
of
yekuRome
Quintus
munguva
Fabius Maximus Gurgis.
Quintus
And
Fabius
if you were
Maximum
born in
Gurgis.
Quintilis,
Kana waizvarwa muQuintilis
then you were born in the fifth month and often
wakanga
given that
wakazvarwa
name.
mumwedzi
Now
wechishanu.
we
Saka
associated that
waipiwa
with
zita
Trump
iroro kazhinji kacho.
because he's the fifth
Takazozvibatanidza
president
naTrump
and he will
nekuti
also
ndiye
be the
president
seventh.
wechi5
And we know
zvakare ndiye
in
achange ari
previous
wechi7.
studies that fifth and the seventh are the
Takazviona
same. So that
muzvidzidzo
Roman
zvekare kuti
calendar
5 na 7
notes the fifth month
zvakafanana.
as Quintilis. When we
Kalenda
drop that down to
yekuRome
the Julian
inoti mwedzi
calendar and
wechi5
also the
ndiQuintilis.
Gregorian,
Tikazoenda
that
kuJulian calendar
equates to
kune
July.
Gregorian
And
zvakare
July,
tinoona kuti
it was changed
inoenzana
from
naJuly.
Quintilis to
July
July
yakachinjwa kubva
by
kuQuintilis kuenda
Julius Caesar.
kuJuly
He named it after
naJulius
himself,
Caesar.
Caesar being
Akaridoma
the
achitevedza
punitive
zita
word for
rake
elephant.
Caesar.
And
Iriyo
we noted that
vara
in July of this year, the
renzou.
year of elections,
Toziva kuti
that the
July
Republican National
gore
Convention
rino
would be held
elections
between the
Republican National
15th and the
Convention
17th of
yakaitwa
July.
pakati pa15
Julius Caesar being
17 yaJuly.
very
Julius Caesar
significant in this time
ari
period.
significant zvakadaro
His
time period
official
ino.
title was dictator,
Title yake
and
iri
towards the end of
official
his
yaiva
life,
kuti
he was
dictator.
called
Pakunopedzisira
Dictator
kweupenyu
Perpetua,
hwake akadaidzwa kunzi dictator
Dictator
anogara
Perpetuus,
nekusingaperi.
which is dictator in
Dictator
perpetuity or
perpetuus.
dictator
Zvoreva kuti
forever.
dictator
He was
anogara
precariously
nekusingaperi.
balanced on the cusp between the old Republican system and the new
akanga akabalansa
autocracy that would be under
pamahombekombe
Augustus.
Republican system
Many
yekare
Romans treated him as the
neautocracy
first
inyuwani
emperor.
yaiva pasi
He was
paAugustus.
considered the
Vakawanda
founder of the
vakamutrita
system
seempara
of
wekutanga.
one-man rule.
Akanzi ndiye
And one of
akava
the first
founder
things he
wesystem
did
ye-one man
when he
one rule.
became
Chimwe
dictator
chekutanga chaakaita paakaita
was override the
dictator
system of quasi-democratic
kwaiva
voting.
kubvisa
So he
system
effectively started choosing Roman
yekuvhota
officials
zviri
himself.
half half.
That's one of the
Saka
first things he did. So that's July.
ndiye akatanga kuchuza
And I just
maroman
want to
officials iye
quote
pachezvake.
a late
Saka
night
ndiyo
comedian.
July.
Now, I'm not suggesting
Ndoda
late night comedians
kungokota
are prophets,
umwe
but I did
mucomedian
take note of this
handisi kuti
particular.
late night comedian maprophets kwete. Asi
He said that he joked like
Wona kuti
American History
akati
Volume 1, 1492 to 1877. But in
munhoroondo
future
yeAmerica
generations,
volume
the
1
textbooks will be
1492
called
kusvika
American
1877
History,
asi
first half of
mageneration
July
ekumberi
2024. Because that's
inenge yakunzi
how
nhoroondo
the
yeAmerica
first half of July was
hafu
seen.
yekutanga
It's just like this
ya2024 nekuti
huge,
ndo kuonekwa kwakaitwa hafu ya
significant
mwedzi
historical
waJuly.
events all happening in
Mahistoric events anga
one
ari
half of a
significant
month.
makuru zvese
I mean, he gave
zvaiitika
the joke in the
muhafu
middle of July.
yemwedzi akazvipa hake
So
joke pakati
nobody would
paJuly
deny that
achijoka zvake.
July hasn't been huge or
Hapana
wasn't huge and a
anoramba kuti
significant month.
July yanga isiri ihombe uye iri
But one of the
significant mwedzi
comments
iwoyo.
that I've received
Imwe
regularly,
yemacomments
well, not regularly,
andakagamuchira
but that similar comments that I've received from people
airamba
is
achingouya kubva
that
kuvanhu
isn't
ndeyekuti
our test sexism?
kotest yedu haisi
Where do
sexism
we
here.
see sexism here in these events
Sexism
of this month?
tinoiona papi
In particularly,
muzviitiko
I guess
izvi
they were referring to
nemwedzi
the
uyu.
Republican
Ndofunga kuti
National
vaitaura
Convention.
nenyaya
So I just want to go
dzeRepublican
over some
National
of the events.
Convention.
I actually want to concentrate on one event of July, but let's first of all review the events of last month.
Tambodzokorodza zviitiko zvakaitika mwedzi wapfuura.
Might do is rub. Some room. Probably make it more room here. All right. So July 1.
Saka musi wa1 July.
Anything significant happen? Yes.
Chakaitika here chiri
The
significant.
Supreme Court of the United States handed down a decision
United States
on
yakapa
Trump
tsarudzo maererano naTrump
v. USA.
yainzi Trump versus
It gave
USA.
the President of the United States
Zvakapa president
absolute
weUnited
immunity
States
in official acts.
immunity.
So this was a
Absolute.
landmark court case, and we'll look at that in
Official
more
acts
depth in a
yaiva
minute.
landmark
So
court
that
case.
is a significant
Tichatarisa
event of
neudzamu
July, Trump
kuchinguvana.
versus USA.
Saka zviri significant
On Trump, on July
Trump versus USA.
July 2,
July
we see the
2.
first Democratic congressman come
Tinoona
out and call
Democratic
for
congressman
President Biden to
wekutanga
step aside.
achibuda pachena
That was
achitaura
July
kuti
2.
President Biden ngava
July
achitsvaka
13,
chinzvimbo. Tozoonawo July 13
we have the assassination attempt of Donald Trump.
pane akazama kuuraya Donald Trump.
July 15 to 18,
July 15 kusvika July 18.
July 15, the RNC begins,
July 15
and the Vice
RNC
President is
inotanga.
announced as
Vice President anotaura
J.D. Vance. Is it J.D.?
J.D. Vance.
Yep. And on July 18, Trump
Musi wa18 July
is, and I'm going to write crowned. So that is the
Trump
language
anogadzwa.
that the journalists used on more than one
Language
occasion.
yakashandiswa nemajournalists
And then
vacho
we're going to come down to July 21.
kakawanda. Patinozouya pana July 21.
And this is when President Biden officially withdrew from the presidential race. He announces his withdrawal, and Kamala Harris announces her candidacy on July 21. So July 21, Biden withdraws.
Saka July 21, Biden withdraw.
July 22, Harris
22 July
is now
Harris
the official. She's not the official. She is the new presumptive presidential nominee. So I'll write Democratic presumptive, because we haven't had the DNC yet, nominee.
Democratic presumptive nominee.
Quite a lot of significant events that happened in this month. So one person that wrote suggested that they felt that the resignation of Biden and the candidacy of Kamala Harris was more significant when it came to sexism than the other events. They felt it was hugely significant, and I don't disagree with its significance. July 21 is a significant date in Millerite history, and it connects to 2014 and the Sunday Law. So I thought that was a valid point. What I wanted to pick up was sexism. So they could see the sexism in this history. You've got now you've got a woman, not only a woman, a black woman representing women's rights and intersectionality, and versus Trump, who represents sexism or misogyny and nationalism. So it's just like 2016. So I do believe it's part of the story. So they saw more sexism there than anything else that had happened in July. However, I did point out that they were missing the misogyny of July 18. Now, I'm sure you've all read, and I hope you've read it maybe 2 or 3 times, the article that was put on media broadcast regarding day 4 of the RNC.
Read day 4.
And let's see if I can share it. It's from the People's World. And this, there were many good articles that share the details of that day, but this was a pretty good overview of day 4. And it's entitled, "This is a Man's World, Republicans' Misogyny on Full Display." On night 3 of the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee, Donald Trump arrived to the James Brown classic, "It's a Man's World." And then regardless, the message was clear: Trump's Republican Party and the vision it has for the future of the United States is a man's world. That article and others similar to it need to be read and understood. I'm not going to go over that article or those the events of that day with you, because I'm hoping you've already done that. If you can't see the sexism in day 4 of the RNC, then you need to watch it. Google it. There's 6 hours of it on C-SPAN that are easily accessible. And I mean, I know, what day is it? It's the 10th of August. And as of my last look on YouTube, there are 11 presentations of Parminder up from this last camp meeting. So there's a lot to watch and do. And I wouldn't dream to suggest that you put aside his studies. But if you can't see the sexism and misogyny of what happened on July 18, you really need to look into that. Read that article a number of times, and even if you flick through the recordings, it would be worthwhile. So I'm not going to go over that, because that should be just homework for everyone. Okay, so it stands out. So I want to suggest that sexism is a theme that actually runs through all these events of July. And I want to go back to July 1. And the Supreme Court's decision, it brings down its decision on the last day of term. Of its term. It was a long-awaited decision. They delayed the giving of it for some time. I think, from what I understand, it's because of the contentious debates that went on about this decision within the justices. But it handed down a 6-3 decision on purely partisan lines in a case asking whether presidents may be absolutely immune from criminal prosecution. This was the case brought by Donald Trump and his lawyers in an effort to delay the prosecution brought by Jack Smith in Washington, D.C. for the actions Trump took to set aside the 2020 election by, among other things, pressuring Mike Pence to set different elections in counting the votes. So we back up. So we go back up to August in 2023. Trump is indicted by a grand jury on 4 charges, all relating to election interference, which included the January 6th attack on the Capitol. This is the first time a criminal case has been brought, a case concerning criminal prosecution for alleged official acts has been brought on a president before the Supreme Court. And what the Trump's attorneys did is they filed a motion in the federal prosecution case to dismiss this indictment. And they cited a presidential immunity because of a previous case called Nixon versus Fitzgerald. And we'll explain that in a moment. So they said, Trump's lawyers said, we want this case thrown out. We are claiming presidential immunity. Trump's lawyers argued that the claims of electoral irregularities and voter fraud were efforts to ensure election integrity. So all Trump was doing in good faith was one of his official jobs as president is to ensure election integrity. And that's what he was doing. He was doing his job. Therefore, he's immune from prosecution because he's just doing his official job. It's a responsibility of the president. Then the Justice Department said, no. What he was doing was criminal. It can't be supported by the Constitution or any legal precedent. So this was brought before federal court, and then it went. The case went before a district trial court. So let's have a look at that. This gets seen on a district trial court. And the judge is Tanya. No, spelling it wrong. Spell it right. I think it is with a Y. I'll correct it later. Chutkan. It's a woman judge.
Judge
and Tanya Chutkan, it is with a Y.
Ainsi Tanya Chutkan.
She said presidents are not kings. There is no blanket immunity for criminal acts taken by presidents. And she gave all her reasonings. So what does the Trump team do? They appeal it. They appeal it, and it's going to go to the US Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. So it's going to go to the Court of Appeals,
yaenda iyo
DC.
ku
I'm
Court
going to
of
write this.
Appeals.
DC is the District of Columbia,
Yaitsi DC.
Court of
Yaitsi
Appeals.
District of Columbia, Court of Appeals.
And it's going to go to a board of 3 judges. Those judges are
Judge matatu.
J.
Judge wayo vaiva J. Michelle
Childs, Florence Y. Penn, and Karen L. Henderson.
Na Karen L. Henderson.
I might point out that at least one of these, I think Karen Henderson was a Trump appointee.
Umwe wavo,
From
at
his
least ainzi
previous
Karen
term.
Henderson. Aiva
So it
akaappointwa
goes
naTrump
before the US
term
Court
yake
of Appeals
yekumashure.
for the District of Columbia
Saka yakaenda
Circuit. They
ku Court
hear
of
arguments
Appeals ku
in the
District of Columbia
immunity
Circuit.
dispute. It's
Vakanzwa
a 3-judge
ma-arguments
panel.
e-immunity dispute.
So the
Yaiva
Federal
panel
Appeals
yemajaji
Court
matatu.
unanimously
Appeals
agreed
Court
with
vakabvumirana
the District Court.
zvisina kurambirana ne-District Court.
And I'm just going to bring it up.
Ndichangozviunza izvi.
Increase it. Okay, the United States Court of Appeals. So this is a 57-page response.
Saka i-response ine page
And
57.
I just want to read the beginning of it.
Ndoda kungoverenga kwekutanga kwayo.
It's before Henderson, Childs, and Pan, the circuit judges, and they're going to deliver their opinion. And their opinion is filed per curiam. Per curiam means by the court. They're not speaking individually. They want the court to speak as a whole rather than by a single justice. It's a term used when decisions are very significant. And it means to say that this is without bias. We're speaking with unity. So Donald J. Trump, let me make it a little larger. Donald J. Trump was elected the 45th President of the United States on November 8, 2016. He was sworn into office at noon on January 20, 2017, and served until his term expired at noon on January 20, 2021. At that moment, President Trump became former President Trump, and his successor, Joseph R. Biden, became president and began his own 4-year term. Although this sequence is set by the Constitution, it did not proceed peacefully. Indeed, from Election Day 2020 forward, the government alleges that President Trump denied that he had lost his bid for a second term and challenged the election results through litigation, pressure on state and federal officers, the organisation of an alternate slate of electors, and other means. His alleged interference in the constitutionally prescribed sequence culminated with a Washington, D.C. rally held on January 6, 2021, the day set by the Electoral Count Act, for the Congress to meet in joint session to certify the election results. The rally, headlined by President Trump, resulted in a march of thousands to the Capitol and the violent breach of the Capitol building. The breach delayed the congressional proceedings for several hours, and it was not until the early morning of January 7th that the 2020 presidential election results were certified, naming Joseph R. Biden as the soon-to-be 46th president. Since then, hundreds of people who breached the Capitol on January 6, 2021 have been prosecuted and imprisoned. And on August 1, 2023 in Washington, D.C., former President Trump was charged in a 4-count indictment as a result of his actions challenging the election results and interfering with the sequence set forth in the Constitution for the transfer of power from one president to the next. Former President Trump moved to dismiss the indictment, and the district court denied his motion. Today, we affirm the denial. For the purpose of this criminal case, former President Trump has become Citizen Trump, with all the defenses of any other criminal defendant. But any executive immunity that may have protected him while he served as president no longer protects him against this prosecution. So that was their decision. This is a 57-page document, and students of constitutional law have said that this is the most bulletproof argument, bulletproof analysis of the Constitution that you can come to. That there is absolutely no immunity here. So it's not an easy read, because it's a lot of legal but if you can kind of read over the references, it's so very solid. So this Court of Appeals, a panel of 3 women have agreed with the district court with Tanya Chutkan. So the Circuit Court of Appeals panel unanimously affirmed the district court ruling. They concluded that Trump's alleged actions lacked any lawful discretionary authority. I'm reading from Wikipedia. You can look this up yourself. Lacked any lawful discretionary authority, and he is answerable in court for his conduct because former President Trump has become Citizen Trump. We read that. The panel held further that former presidents have no immunity for allegedly violating generally applicable criminal laws while in office, and specifically to commit crimes that would neutralize the most fundamental check on executive power, the recognition and implementation of election results. So what is the most fundamental check on the executive power on the president? It is the election results. It is the votes. And to neutralize those votes is a criminal act. The panel noted that while the separation of powers doctrine may immunize lawful discretionary acts, it does not bar the federal criminal prosecution of a former president for every official act. And that absolute presidential immunity would collapse our system of separated powers by placing the president beyond the reach of all 3 branches. So what have they said? If you give the president absolute immunity, it will collapse the separation of the 3 branches. The panel concluded that we cannot accept that the office of the presidency places its former occupants above all the law thereafter. Okay. But on July 1, the Supreme Court of America found otherwise. Their answer today is broadly yes. Former President Donald Trump is entitled to expansive levels of immunity from criminal prosecution for any official acts he committed while in office. And it was a 6-3 decision. The dissent in this case was by 3 women justices. SCOTUS, so Tanya Chutkan says no immunity. I should probably write that. No immunity. District Court of Appeals confirms.
District Court of Appeals ikakonfirma zvakare.
No immunity.
Hapana, Trump hawani immunity.
And then the 3 justices, the liberal justices on the Supreme Court,
Sonia
Sotomayor, Elena Kagan, and Ketanji Jackson Brown.
Na Ketanji Jackson Brown.
They dissent.
Vakaramba, vakapikisa.
No immunity.
Vakati hapana immunity yatinomupa.
So here we have 7 women.
Saka une madzimai
7 women are going to disagree
madzimai
with
manomwe
6
vacharambirana
conservative judges on the Supreme Court,
conservative judges,
5 of which are
Supreme Court.
men, and the only
5 vanenge
division
vari
within those
varume.
6
division
conservative
inenge
judges
iripo pakati
is by Amy
pe6 aya
Coney Barrett.
conservative judges.
So she gives
Amy Coney Barrett.
a partial concurrence.
Saka
So
iye
with the
anongotenderanawo
decision
zviri
that's
partial.
handed down by the Supreme
Saka
Court,
nesarudzo
Chief
yakapiwa
Justice
neSupreme
Roberts
Court.
gives the opinion of
Chief
the court.
Justice Roberts vakapa opinion
The
yecourt.
other 5 justices
Vamwe
concur,
majustices 5 vakabvumirana.
but Justice Amy Barrett, she only gives a
Asi Justice
partial
Amy Barrett vakangobvumiranawo
agreeance or partial occurrence
partial.
because she actually
Nekuda
disagrees with some of the ways
aitorambiranawo.
they've come to their conclusions. Bad
Dzimwe nzira
methodology.
dzavakasvika pamaconclusion
So
avo.
she's going to
Vachita
disagree. She's going to
nemethodologies
agree with their
Saka
conclusions.
anoramba.
She's going to
Anobvumirana
disagree with how they got there
nemaconclusion avo.
with
Asi
part of it.
anorambirana nekuti vasvika ipapo
So,
zvimwe zvavanenge vaita.
that 7 women, this is
Saka
all
madzimai
that
7
have stood and said no presidential immunity. That's saying
vakatsoka
something
vakati hapana
against
presidential
these 5
immunity.
men.
Zviri
So what
kutaura
happens
zvinhu
now
against
is
varume
that
5
this now
ava.
gets
Saka
kicked back
zvinozoitika apa
to
ndezvekuti
the district
iyi
trial court.
inozokikirwa
So the Supreme
kumashure
Court has said yes,
kudistrict trial court.
they can
Supreme
have
Court yakati
immunity for official acts,
vanogona kuve
partial
neimmunity
immunity,
yemaofficial acts,
whatever that means,
partial
because nobody knows what
immunity.
that means yet,
Hamene kuti zvinorevei
for
nekuti hapana
unofficial
anoziva kuti
acts.
zvinorevei
And it'll be up
kuma
to Daniel
unofficial acts.
Chutkan on the district trial court to work out what's
Wakati
official and what's not official.
Tanya
She's
Chutkan
about to
district
enter a
official
nightmare
court
of
ndiye
trying to
achazoona
work that
kuti
out.
partial
Because
zvinorevei.
the president will just say, oh, no,
Apuwa
that was official. And there'll
Next
be an
president
argument about
anongoti
what's
hai izvi
official and not
zvazviri
official, and
official.
it's going to be
Vongopawo
appealed,
argument
and it's going to
yekuti
go
zviri
straight
official
back to the
ndezvipi
Supreme Court.
zvisiri ndezvipi yongoapiwa
So,
futi yodzokera kusupreme court
yeah,
zvakare.
so it's kicked back to the trial court
Saka
to
inodzokerwa
distinguish between official
kumashure
and private conduct.
kudistrict trial court
And so
kuti
really what
vaone
this
kuti
means
private
is
conduct
it's going to
ndeipi,
be
official
virtually
conduct
impossible to come to a
zvazvongoreva kuti
trial before the November
zvichanetsa
election.
kusvika patrial maelection anovhember asati asvika
Now, I want
zvichanetsa.
to share with you
Saka ndoda kushare nemi
it's the Court of Appeals. I'm just going to close that.
pane court of appeals iyi tichangovhara izvi.
Okay. So this is the decision that was handed down by the Supreme Court
Iyi
on
ndiyo
July 1.
sarudzo yakahandwa down nesupreme
And
court
what I
musi
want
wajuly
to
1
take you to
kwandoda
is
kukuendesai
Sotomayor's dissent. She has about 30 pages in
dissent
here,
yakaitwa
starting at around
naSotomayor.
67.
ane mapeji anogona kuita
Just scroll
30
down.
tichitanga kumapeji 67 uko
Here it is here,
tichitsika nayo.
the beginning of her dissent. Justice Sotomayor, with whom
kwedissent
Justice
yake.
Kagan and Justice
Justice Sotomayor
Jackson joined
Justice
dissenting.
Kagan na
I'll
Justice
just take you to the
Jackson
end of her
vakajoina mukudissent.
dissent argument.
Ndichangotorawo kupera kweargument yake yekurambirana kwaakaita nesarudzo yakaitwa nekoti.
And we'll read the final closing paragraphs.
Tichaverenga maparagraphs ekupedzesera.
Looking beyond the fate of this particular prosecution, the long-term consequences of today's decision are stark. The court effectively creates a law-free zone around the president, upsetting the status quo that has existed since the founding. This new official acts immunity now lies about like a loaded weapon for any president that wishes to place his own interests, his own political survival, or his own financial gain above the interests of the nation. The President of the United States is the most powerful person in the country and possibly the world. When he uses his official powers in any way, under the majority's reasoning, he now will be insulated from criminal prosecution. Order the Navy's SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival? Immune. Organizes a military coup to hold on to power? Immune. Takes a bribe in exchange for a pardon? Immune. Let the president violate the law. Let him exploit the trappings of his office for personal gain. Let him use his official power for evil ends. Because if he knew that he may one day face liability for breaking the law, he might not be as bold and fearless as we would like him to be. That is the majority's message today. So here in this paragraph, she's broken down the majority's message. What they've said is that they want the president to be fearless, to be able to act without worrying whether he's going to get sued or not. So, you know, if he breaks the law, that's okay because, you know, he might not do important things if he thinks he's going to get sued. So that's her summing up the majority's message. But she's given some very stark examples of what could happen. Even if these nightmare scenarios never play out, and I pray they never do, the damage has been done. The relationship between the president and the people he serves has shifted irrevocably. It can't be changed. It's set. In every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law. So we're going to stop there and just mark July as we now have a king above the law. We might just look at let's just go to her last paragraph. Never in the history of our republic has a president had reason to believe that he would be immune from criminal prosecution if he used the trappings of his office to violate the criminal law. Moving forward, however, all former presidents will be cloaked in such immunity. If the occupant of that office misuses official power for personal gain, the criminal law that the rest of us must abide will not provide a backstop. With fear for our democracy, I dissent. So the courts can't protect the people, they will be there to protect the president. And that's an interesting closing to her dissent, because usually with all dissents, there's this polite qualifier where they'll write with respect or respectfully, I dissent. She didn't write anything to do with respect there. She just said, with fear for our democracy. We talk about RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and her fiery dissents. RBG's got nothing on what Sotomayor has written in this dissent. It's scathing. Okay, so the president is now less like a democratically accountable official than like a little emperor. Now, where did I get that quote from? Let me bring that up.
Anoita kunge ka empara kedu kadiki. Vachivhura kwakatorwa quotation yacho.
Looks like it's gone.
Vabva vaishaya.
Just give me a moment. I would like to get that quote. Oh, I'm quoting from The Guardian. Let me do that. The Guardian had an article called Trump
ndiri kukota kubva kuThe
Trump
Guardian yaiva
presidential immunity
nearticle
that was
yainzi
July 1, 2024.
Trump president
The president is
Trump
now less
presidential
like a
immunity
democratically
musi wa 1
accountable
July
official
2024
than like a little emperor,
president
endowed by
ava
the court with an
nedemocratic
all-encompassing right
accountability
to wield
issue
power as he sees
akuita
fit,
kunge little emperor
much like the way that divine right
anoshandisa
is to
masimba
bless the
paanoda
action of kings. There is
sezvaiitwa
virtually
nemadivine
nothing
right
that he
vachiblesa
is not
makings
allowed to do.
hapasina chinhu
And you'll find
chaanorambidzwa kuita
most of the reputable
unoona
news sources have written similar.
izvi zvakanyorwa
So just want to give some
nemanyusources ari
historical
reputable vachinyora
context.
zvakafanana tichingopawo historical context
So we've got Trump versus the USA.
saka tina Trump versus USA.
And Chief Justice Roberts
and then poita Chief
will
Justice
give his
Roberts
opinion.
Anopa opinion yake.
And Sotomayor, Justice Sotomayor,
Justice Sotomayor
will give her dissent.
vanobva vapawo kurambirana kwavanoita.
And what Roberts is going to cite is a court case called Nixon
court case inonzi Nixon
v. Fitzgerald
versus Fitzgerald.
Now, Richard Nixon was president in the 1960s, and you would all be familiar with the Watergate scandal, which has been spoken about in this movement before. But after he was out of office, he was sued by somebody. So in his official capacity as Commander-in-Chief, one of his official duties as president, he fired somebody. He fired somebody from the Air Force, I think, Fitzgerald probably. And they sued him after. So I think this was in the 1980s. So this went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court decided that he is immune. That presidents, in their official capacity, should be immune from civil lawsuits, especially this was to protect them from frivolous litigation. So this is, he hasn't committed anything criminal, he's just in his capacity as boss, he fired somebody. So presidents have a certain amount of immunity. And this was something that the founders of the Constitution discussed and were aware of way back in the beginning. So they had talked about immunity. And they knew what they were doing, and they never gave full immunity to the president. They did give immunity to the members of Congress. So it took here until Fitzgerald where the Supreme Court made it clear that presidents in their official duties were not... they didn't have to worry about being sued, being taken to court. So, but what else was going on at that time is that there was a civil war, sort of a civil war. You had a lot of protests against the Vietnam War. And what Nixon wanted to do was stop the protests. And so, again, so he was questioned about this. And there's a famous quote from Nixon where he says, when the president does it, it's not illegal. And that was something he said in an interview to David Frost, a BBC journalist. So it was very shocking at the time, and it gets quoted a lot. When the president does it, it's not illegal. Because he thought there's this civil war going on, I've got all these protesters on one side, and me, the government, America, on the other side. So we need to be able to push back against the protesters. And of course, you know, that would tread on free speech and the right of peaceful protests, etc. So you've got all this happening at the same time when the Supreme Court are deciding about
apo Supreme Court
presidential immunity.
ichisarudza panyaya
So
dzepresidential
there's two
immunity.
things. They want to
Saka
protect
pane zvinhu
the
zviviri.
dignity of the
Vanoda
office. They
kuprotecta
don't want the presidents just to be
dignity
sued
yeofisi
by
iyi.
every
Havadi
Joe Blow
mapresidents
for
vangosuyiwawo
frivolous
nemunhu
things.
wese.
And
Nezvinhu
they
zvidiki
want the
zvidiki.
president to be able to just do
Vanodawo
his job
kuti president
without,
agonewo kungogona kuita basa rake
without worry about being
asina
sued.
wari yekuti
The commander-in-chief
uchazosuyiwa
needs to
here.
hire and fire.
Commander in chief
So
anofana kugona kuhaya vanhu
the
nekufaya
game
vanhu.
changer here
Saka game
is
changer apa
firing somebody from the Air Force was not a criminal act.
ndeyekufaya munhu aiva
Now we're
kuair
actually
force
talking about something that's
inenge isiri
criminal.
criminal act. Apa isi tiri kutotaura nezvinhu zviri criminal.
So what Roberts did in
Saka
his
zvakazoitwa
opinion
naRoberts
is he's
muopinion
drawn a
yake.
lot of lines, and this is where the
Tara malaini
confusion
akawanda
and
ndopanouya
the mischief will
confusion
come in.
uye musikanzwa
Because the
paunozopinda
president has official acts, which is the core of his duties, and then outside is what he called the outer perimeter of unofficial acts. So where do you draw the line between an official act and an unofficial act? And that's going to be the job of Kang in the district court. So if you think of the power to pardon somebody, and Sotomayor talked about this, and so did Roberts. So on the 19th of January, the day before the president is not president anymore, he pardons people. Well, what if he takes a bribe from somebody to be pardoned? That's a criminal act. But he will be immune from that. And they've talked about that. They've said, yeah, under this decision, he would be immune from that criminal act. It might be corrupt, but presidential pardons fall within their exclusive sphere of authority, so they can never be prosecuted. And Justice Sotomayor confirms that reading. So if it's outside the official perimeter of official acts, then there is a chance that they could be indicted, but all the president would have to do is say, no, that was actually a presidential act, and I was acting in good faith, trying to protect the country, trying to protect the people, and it would just get poured out in the courts, end up in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will say, yep, it's an official act. So all his job descriptions will be classed as official. So in practice, what it means is that any time the president says, I was doing it because I was president, he's going to be immune. And then if the courts disagree, it just goes all the way to the Supreme Court. So it's going to prevent a jury from finding out if a president committed a number of crimes because he has manipulated the tools of his office, claiming that he was president in doing these things, and he'll never ever face accountability. So this idea of official versus unofficial conduct, core functions versus outer perimeter functions, there's all these lines that Roberts have drawn, criminal and civil, it's pretty muddy. So it's just, bottom line is he has full immunity. So when we look at this history here, there has been a fundamentally huge sea change from June 30 to July 1. The United States of America is a totally different beast on July 1 than it was on June 30. And this, July 1, is not a Donald Trump story. This is a story about the separation of power. This is a fundamental structural change to democracy, as America has understood it in the past. It's a separation of power story. The Supreme Court have rewritten presidential power. They've expanded the power of the presidency, anything beyond what Nixon would have contemplated. So we've discussed the Fitzgerald case, that it was an official act, and it was actually a private lawsuit it wasn't anything to do with criminal actions. So it's a totally different question. This is what Roberts is going to be citing here. But the issues there are totally different to what has happened with the 2020 election on January 6th. So, this is talking about suing people for, money damages, I got sacked and I lost my pay. And what we're talking here is about a bad faith act, a criminal act. So the $1 million question is what's going to happen about January 6th. So all he has to say is that I was protecting election integrity. I was acting in good faith, but there's no evidence that he was acting in good faith, but it doesn't matter. Evidence doesn't matter. And what the Supreme Court has said is that his motives don't matter. So when he goes to court, they're not even to look at the motives of the president. It is just blanket immunity. He claims he was preventing fraud, and acting in good faith.
Fraud and I act in good faith.
Okay. So we're going to have to wait. So this court case isn't finished, it's ongoing. Now, it's, like I said, it's been pushed back to the district trial court. Tanya Chutkan has to decide what's official, what's not official. She has to deliberate on that. Trump's team could appeal, and like I said, she's going to go up to the Supreme Court and back, and there will be no decision before the November elections. So the public don't get to vote on that issue because there is no outcome.
Saka public haigoni kuvhotera panyaya iyoyo nekuti hapana outcome inenge iripo.
So Sotomayor's dissent.
Saka Sotomayor kuramba kwaakaita.
Roberts is going to cite Nixon versus Fitzgerald. Sotomayor is twice going to cite
anozosaita kaviri Dobbs
versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. And why is she going to do that? She's going to do that because what the conservative justices use to come to their conclusions is originalism. Which means they want to take into account text, history, and precedent. And what Sotomayor points out rather clearly is that when it came to Dobbs versus Jackson, this was their argument. Where does the Constitution talk about women's autonomy, about reproductive rights, about abortion? It doesn't. There's nothing in its text. We can't get history. There is no precedent. Therefore, we are we're overruling Roe versus Wade. It's unconstitutional. So this was their method for Dobbs versus Jackson. Originalism. So they used it here. When it came to Nixon versus Fitzgerald, they didn't use it at all. So Nixon versus Fitzgerald, they can't use originalism because the founders did talk about immunity. There is no immunity written into the Constitution. They can't use text, history, or precedent to give presidential immunity, blanket presidential immunity. So up here, they don't use it. And so what she points out is that they only use this when it's convenient. History matters to this court only when it is convenient.
Nhoroondo
They claim to
yakakosha chete
respect
kukoti iyi
text,
pazvinenge
history
zviri
and precedent,
convenient.
but they're definitely
Vanorespekta
not doing
text,
that in
history
this case.
neprecedent asi havasi kuzviita
So
patinouya pacase iyi.
what's the only answer to this? How are we going to put on?
Saka mindiro yega kune zvinhu izvi ndeipi?
The only way to push back against
Nzira
any
yega
of this
yekupusha back
is through
against zvinhu
elections.
izvi
So one thing that does come up
inoburikidza
in these
mumaelections.
discussions
Saka pane
is
chinhu chinobuda
1798.
madiscussions
Because in
aya
1798,
1798.
the United
Nekuti muna
States
1798
introduced 4
America
acts, the
yakaintrodusa ma-acts
Alien
mana.
and Sedition Acts. So the
Alien
second
and
president
Sedition
of the
Acts.
United States was John Adams.
President
And
wechipiri
he was an
weAmerica
autocrat.
ainzi John
He
Adams.
was
Aiva
openly believed in
autocrat.
authoritarian government.
Aitenda pachena
And he wanted
hurumende iri
to
authoritarian.
silence the opposition until the
Aida
next election.
kunyararidza
So
opposition
what he said,
kusvikira
well,
election
we've got this war, which really
yaitevera.
wasn't a war, they call it a
Saka
quasi-war
akataura
with
achiti
France.
hatine hondo
We
pano.
need to
Vachinyepera
stop
vachiti
any
tine kahondo kari
criticism
kwazi
against the
neFrance.
government
Tinofana
while we're at war.
kumisa criticism
It wasn't much of a
against
war. And
hurumende.
they brought in these Alien and
Panyaya
Sedition
yehondo
Acts.
iyi yanga isiri
So
hondo
the Alien
chaizvo.
and
Vakabva
Sedition
vaunza
Acts
ma-Alien and Sedition
were,
Acts aya.
their
Ma-Alien and
purpose
Sedition Acts
was to
basa rawo raiva
criminalize criticism of John Adams himself and the
rekucriminalize
government.
kushoropodzwa kwaJohn Adams
So it deported
nehurumende.
non-citizens
Saka
who were subjects of
vakadipota vanhu vanga
foreign
vasiri
enemies,
macitizens
and it
vavari
attacked the
masubject
core of free
emaforeign
speech
enemies.
and the free
Vakaataka
press. He wanted to
zviri
control
pamudzi
political
wefree
debate until the
speech
next
nefree
election.
press. Aida kucontrola
So
political debate kusvikira election
his vice
yaizotevera.
president was Thomas
Saka vice
Jefferson.
president
Now,
wake
Thomas
ainzi
Jefferson
Thomas
was the
Jefferson.
leader of the
Thomas
opposition party.
Jefferson
So back
aiva
then, the
mutungamiri
vice
weopposition
presidents were of a
party.
different
Pari
party, were
ikoko
of the
vice
opposition
president
party.
vanga vari
That
veparty
changed, I
yakasiyana.
can't remember when that
Vaiva
changed.
veopposition
But
party.
it was different than it is now.
Vakashanduka handichazivi
So
kuti
the only
vakashanduka
way
rini.
to resolve the
Zvazvakasiyana
problem there, because people were,
nezvazvava izvezvi. Nzira
editors of
yega
newspapers
yekusolva
were
maproblem
jailed.
iyi
The
nekuti vanhu vaiva
only way
maeditors
to resolve that
manewspaper
was to have an
vakaiswa
election
mumajeri.
and kick John Adams
Nzira
out,
yega
and Thomas Jefferson
yavairizova
became
izvozvo
president,
yaiva
and he
yekuita
just
sarudzo
let
vobvisa
those
Adams.
acts
Thomas Jefferson akava president.
expire, and he pardoned all those
Akangoita
that were
kuti
jailed.
maacts
So that
aite
was the answer
expire
to the
ndobva
problem in
aregerera vakaiswa mujeri.
1798. We
Ndo yaiva
recognise
mhinduro
1989 as the
kuproblem
time of the end. Information
ya1798.
war began. We
Toziva
can
kuti
see that same
1989
information
time
war in
of the end.
1798 with the
Information
Alien and
war
Sedition Acts,
yakatanga.
and
Tinogona kuonawo zvakare
that's been in
information
our
war
movement for quite some time.
ya1798 neAlien and
So why are
Sedition
we
Acts.
bringing this up? It gets cited, referenced here as well.
Zvazviri mumovement
That
kwenguva tiri kuzviudza nekuti
the
zvakasaitwawo
framers of the
zvakare
Constitution were
vachiti
dealing
maframers
with
veconstitution
presidential immunity back
vaidhila
in the
nepresidential
beginning
immunity
of the country.
kumashure kwekutanga kwecountry.
And the only way to
Nzira
resolve
yega
those
yekusolva kana
problems
kuresolva
was through
matambudziko
election.
iwayo yaiva kuburikidza nesarudzo.
So all right, so I want to leave that for the
Saka
moment,
ndorambosiya izvi
and
kwechinguva.
we're going to do a little review ourselves.
Tichaita review pachezvedu.
Oh, sorry. So just note that we're going to mark July
chingonotai kuti tichamaka
as
July
United States now has a king who is above the law.
kuti United States yava namambo ari pamusoro pemutemo.
We're going to go back to the prophecies of
Todzokera
Daniel.
kumashure kumaprophecies aDaniel.
And this has been in the public record for a long time, so we'll just
Izvi
walk through
zvazviri
this
mupublic record kwenguva
quickly.
refu, saka
So
tichangofamba
Daniel,
tichienda nazvo nekukasika. Saka
4
Daniel
main
apa
prophecies. Daniel 2,
maprofesi mana makuru. Daniel 2,
7, 8,
Daniel 7,
and
Daniel
11.
8 neDaniel 11.
Sorry. Two, 7, 8, 11. So in Daniel 2,
Daniel
we
7,
have
Daniel 8 na11.
the
Muna
head
Daniel 2
of
tine
gold.
musoro wegoridhe.
We'll go arms, and shoulders of silver,
poita maoko nemapendekete
belly,
esilva,
thighs,
dumbu
brass,
nezvidya zvebrass,
legs of iron,
makumbo eiron,
feet, iron and clay.
tsoka dzine iron yakasangana neclay.
Daniel 7,
Daniel
lion,
7,
bear,
shumba,
leopard,
poita bear, poita leopard,
nondescript beast,
poita chikara
or as
chisingatsananguriki,
the book of Revelation would say, a
kana
dragon,
kuti zvinotaurwa
and
naRevelation
feet 9 and clay,
idragon,
horn.
makumbo eiron neclay
Daniel 8,
ndo nyanga. Daniel 8,
yep, we can put an ox there, but let's
togona
just go with
kuisa
what's there.
desha
So
apa.
we've got a
Tongonyora
ram,
zviripo. Tine
he
ram,
goat,
poita he goat,
little horn,
undobwe, poita
and we
kanyanga
know that we've
kadiki.
got masculine and feminine in the horns.
Tinoziva kuti munyanga umu pane
Daniel
masculine
11,
feminine. Daniel 11,
king of the north,
mambo ekumusoro,
king of the north, king of the north.
mambo ekumusoro pese, mambo ekumusoro.
So when we go back to Daniel chapter 2,
Patinodzokera kuDaniel chapter 2,
we know that we're following a theme. And what's
tinoziva
our
kuti tine
theme
theme
of Daniel chapter 2?
Theme yedu yaDaniel chapter 2 ndeyechii?
Thou, O Nebuchadnezzar, art this
Iwe Nebukadnezar
head
ndiwe
of gold, and
musoro
after thee
wegoridhe.
shall arise another
Mushure mako
kingdom.
pachasumuka
So what we have
umambo
here is a
mambo.
king
Saka zvatinazvo apa ndi mambo
and a kingdom.
neumambo.
Daniel 7, politics.
Daniel 7,
Daniel 8,
politics. Daniel 8,
religion. Daniel 11
chitendero.
is
Daniel
their
11,
purpose. The purpose of the
ndiyo
king of the north.
basa ravo,
All
basa
right.
ramambo
So
ekumusoro.
we had discussions at our
Saka
last camp meeting, the camp meeting that
takaita
was held
madiscussions
in
kucamp meeting
Australia
yedu
down
yekupedzisira,
in
camp meeting
Aries
yakaitwa
Inlet,
kuAustralia,
when we were discussing
Aries Inlet,
patriarchy and
pataitaura nyaya
terminology.
dzepatriarchy
And the subject came up about
neterminology.
kings.
Subject yakauya
And
yaitaura nezvemadzimambo.
we didn't come to any conclusion, you know, about inclusive language, etc. But let's just consider these prophecies of Daniel, because this represents the antithesis to what? We look at Daniel chapter 2, we see a mountain, and out of the mountain comes a stone. And if we use parable methodology, we know Daniel tells us clearly that in the days of these kings, God is going to set up another kingdom. So this is a kingdom. What does it have to have? It has to have a king. So this is a king and a kingdom.
Saka ndi mambo nehumambo hwake.
So what's the difference then between this king and a kingdom
pakati
and
pamambo
these
uyu nehumambo
kings and
hwake
kingdoms?
nemadzimambo ayo nehumambo
What
hwavo?
characterize the king that we wrote on the other side of the board for July?
Chii chinopa macharacters aking watanyora kune rimwe divi reboard, kuboard riri kuseri. Mambo uyu ari
Above the law.
pamusoro pemutemo.
What's going to characterize this king?
Uyu mambo uyu chichamucharacteriza chii?
Under law.
Anenge ari
When we
pasi
consider
pemutemo.
Jesus Christ,
Patakatarisa
so God
tichikonzida
was
Jesu
incarnated as a human being, and he
ndimwari anenge
came as a
apinda
man-child. He was
auya
male,
semunhu, akauya
and he was
semurume,
recognized as king.
akaonekwa
The three
samambo.
magi, they came and worshipped him
Mamejai
as king.
matatu vakauya vakamunamata
So why is
vachiti
that not patriarchal?
saka nemhaka
And that
yezvi
is
siri
because he is
patriarchal
under
izvi
law.
inyaya yekuti
And
ari
Paul
pasi
tells us that,
pemutemo.
the book of
Paul
Galatians, he
anotiudza
was born
kuna
under the law.
Galatians kuti
That law
akazvarwa
is
ari
not
pasi
just the law of
pemutemo.
heredity. He was subject
Mutemo
to the
uyu
law,
hausingori
just like
mutemo
all his
weheredity,
subjects.
aingovawo subject
He's subject to
kumutemo
the same law
sezvakangoitawo
It's
masubject
all of his
ese
kingdom.
anotongwa nemutemo
And that
wakangofanana
is his
seunotongwa
ministry on earth.
nemambo
Whether
wake
that
ndo
3.5
ministry yake
years
pano
that he
pasi
walked on the earth
tikaima akairi
as
3.5
the
years
leader of the
idzodzo
movement,
dzaakafamba
he was subject to law.
semutungamiri wemovement aiva pasi
So
pemutemo.
this king and kingdom is subject to law. It's
mambo uyu
under law,
neumambo hwake huri pasi
not
pemutemo,
above the law.
hausi pamusoro pemutemo.
So I would suggest that it's perfectly okay that we have a male leader of the movement, as long as he is under law. It also validates the fact that we have vows. We have a living document of vows that give us more understanding of our laws. And we say, well, what law are we under? Oh, yeah, 10 commandments. But if we sum it all up, we're under the law of the golden rule, which really just sums them up. And under that law, we can see equality in all our relationships. So once a king becomes above the law, then it is only a natural consequence that things equality issues will be rolled back. So here's another thought. This king and kingdom are under law. That's what makes it so much different. Why it behaves differently, why it thinks differently, why its purpose is different. But what does that make the mountain? That mountain, it doesn't realize it, but it is above the law. It doesn't believe, it is above the law. So, one more minute. So I'm not going to take the time to summarize what I've done. Well, I should a little bit, shouldn't I? Sorry. So we've gone to back to July. And I guess the point of what I wanted to do today was to show how July 18 was very significant, but all the events of July have some connection with Julius Caesar and the change that America is taking place. We see in July 1 that the president will now have blanket immunity in its official acts and part of its non-official acts, whatever that means. And then on July 18, Trump was crowned as the nominee, and we know that he will ultimately be the president of the United States. So I just wanted to, the purpose of this was to show that sexism can be seen right through these significant events of July. We see it in the decision of July 1, the decisions that led up to that by 7 very capable women who know how to read and understand the Constitution and apply it, but they were overruled by the conservative judges, and that Sotomayor's dissent really, if you have a chance to read it, it's about 30 pages. She cites Dobbs versus Jackson twice in that dissent, explaining the wrong methodology that is being used, because how can they say that, we can't make decisions on women's reproductive rights, that's not our right, it's not in the Constitution. No, we'll give that to the states, that's for the states to decide. And yet they can come out on such an important decision as presidential immunity, they can come out and just totally disregard history and precedent and text and make aggrandize that presidential power. So let's close in prayer. Dear God in heaven, we've lived through amazing times. We know that there is much more to come. The Sunday law it's just a Boston. It's just the beginning. That things will escalate as we lead to the loud cry. Help us to understand what has happened in this history, not to just walk through it,
kwete
with closed
kungofambawo
eyes,
uchifamba
but to study
takavhara
it,
maziso, asi
to
kuidzidza,
see sexism where it
kuona
is, to be
sexism
aware of
pairi, kuve
where
aware
rights are being trampled on.
kuti marights
So we
akutsikwa
pray for
tsikwa
an
papi.
increase in knowledge
Saka
on this
tonamatira
subject
kuwedzerwa kweruzivo
and corrections
pasubject
where
iyi
they are needed. Help
nekugadziriswa
us to
pazvinoneedwa.
move
Tidetsereiwo
forward positively
kufambira mberi
as we
zviri
tackle the
positive
events of tomorrow.
apo
And we
tinoita
ask,
takoma
we've asked
events
for a blessing
amangwana.
on the camp meeting in Europe
Tanamatirawo
right now,
chikomborero
and we ask in
mukumeeting iri
Jesus'
kueurope
name.
nhasi.
Amen.
Tonamata muzita raJesu. Amen.